Hey, Diva family. Welcome to episode 33 of Psychedelic Divas. Today, we are exploring the mysterious world of ayahuasca. And while I have certainly mentioned ayahuasca many times on the podcast, we have yet to do a deep dive into this master plant teacher. So today's guest is Celina De Leon, who I recently met when she gave a talk at a local organization I'm a member of. And I was impressed by her lineage, her devotion to her ayahuasca path, and her focus on the feminine. So I invited her to be on the podcast. Let me read her formal bio so you can have a better understanding of her work in this world. Celina De Leon is the founder of Circle of Sacred Nature Church and co-director of Posada Natura Retreat Center in Costa Rica. She has 25 years of experience working with ayahuasca and has been a long-standing apprentice of an indigenous healer from the Amazon of Colombia for the past 17 years. As an adjunct faculty at the Graduate Theological Union, she teaches at the intersection of entheogens, psychedelics, and spiritual care. She's also the mother of 3 children and a long-standing meditation and yoga practitioner. Welcome to Psychedelic Divas, Celina. I'm so looking forward to this conversation.
Thank you. Thank you so much. Great to be here.
Let's really get basic here. For those listeners who have not yet tried ayahuasca and don't know anything about the plants that make up the brew, I would love to start with your basic overview of what ayahuasca is, where it comes from, its indigenous roots, and its current place in the plant medicine world. So, ayahuasca 101, if you will.
Okay. We call this medicine ayahuasca, but I think what is so interesting about ayahuasca is that there's actually many different names for it and many different lineages and so many expressions of how people work with this medicine. So I just always like to lift up the diversity that's out there and then within that, I think that the most basic way we can understand it is that it's a combination of 2 plants, a woody liana, Banisteriopsis caapi, and a leaf, typically referred to as chacruna or chacrupanga, Psychotria viridis, or Diploteris cabarena are the scientific names for it. And it's actually a tea. So when you combine these 2 plants together, it forms a really incredible admixture. And the psychotropic, psychedelic properties are actually DMT in the leaf. But many feel, and myself included, that there's so much that gives way to the experience of it. It's not just that one molecule, but it's understood that it's the combination of the leaf and the vine that enable this effect to happen. And so that is generally what is referred to as ayahuasca, is that tea sacrament.
And so let's actually be really clear that you can't just use the leaf on its own. You have to combine the two. So tell us why that is.
Yeah, it's very interesting that if you were just to ingest the leaf or a tea of the leaf, your stomach acid would actually break it down. And it's due to a monoamine oxidase inhibitor in the vine that inhibits the enzyme that would break down the leaf, or the chemicals in the leaf. And it's that combination that allows the psychotropic properties to come forth. And I always think it's so beautiful that, this medicine, it traditionally comes from the Northwest Amazon, from indigenous communities in that region. And when anthropologists asked the shamans or the healers about this medicine, how did you know to combine these 2 plants and the most biodiverse forest in the world? And they all kind of unanimously allude to, like, yeah, the plants told us. And so it really has this like very, very interesting, beautiful mystery to it. And I think that pervades in the way the medicine works on so many levels, but it's very mysterious actually how it has even come to be.
Oh, it's very mysterious. Because first of all,
Yeah.
let's be clear. If you haven't had the experience of drinking ayahuasca, let me let you know that it is not something that you would just ingest on your own because of its taste. Some people do like the taste of it. I think most people find it to be rather a negative experience. I myself, I'm in that latter category. And So you have to, here you are, and it's not just typically each shaman, each brewer is adding other plants as well. So it's an entire jungle tea, and so each one has a sort of a little bit of different flavor, but also different medicines and involved in it. But if you, so it's the ayahuasca vine. I think people are often confused because they think, oh, the ayahuasca vine must have the DMT in it, but it's the MAO inhibitor. It's the one that
Yeah.
makes the leaf possible. And again, here you are in ancient, hundreds, thousands of years ago, putting these two plants together. When I was in Peru, and I asked that question of the curandero that I was working with, and his response was the mushrooms. The mushrooms told us.
Interesting.
So not just plants, like specifically saying it was the mushrooms that guided the putting together of the two plants. And I mean, we'll never know exactly, but what a
Yeah.
fascinating beginning for such a master plant.
Mhm. Definitely. Definitely.
So tell us about your first experience with ayahuasca. Well, I'm curious, what made you say yes to the medicine, and then was it that journey that shaped your path, or was it a later journey?
Yeah, my first introduction to ayahuasca was actually academically. I was a senior at Stanford in an ecological anthropology class, and we had to do our final paper on a topic of our choice. And I was always interested in the Amazon and medicinal plants. And so I was in Green Library and I was reading about anthropological accounts. And when I came across the account of ayahuasca, I was just completely blown away that this even existed. I felt like the words were just floating off the page. I was just totally fascinated by it. So I wrote my 25-page term paper on it, and I was just knew that it was something that I wanted to try. And at that point in time, more than 25 years ago, it wasn't nearly as accessible as it is now. And it wasn't until I knew someone who knew someone who knew someone who pointed me in the direction of a ceremony. And I had the opportunity to sit in ceremony for the first time in Northern California with a traditional healer from Peru. And as it can so often happen with ayahuasca, I really believe like ayahuasca is a very relational medicine. It's very mysterious how it connects with each person. And for me, my first experience was even though I drank 3 times and I just had so many ideas of what would happen to me, it was like, hi, nice to meet you. Shake hands, come see me again where I'm from. That was the clear message. And so I went and saw her again, but it wasn't until a year after that that I had the opportunity to go to Peru. And then in my second experience with the medicine is when I really had a very, very strong, just very healing experience, and a deep relationship started there. So that was my entry. And then I just kind of had a feeling that I knew it was going to be part of my life, but I didn't know how. I continued to sit in ceremonies for my own healing. I was navigating different just challenges at the time, and it was very, very helpful for me in ways that nothing else was really. But within that time, I had a very clear message that I would only really be able to go deeper with this medicine if I found a teacher that I resonated with. And then many years later, after I let go of that possibility of that ever happening. Of course, that's usually when interesting things happen when you let go of your expectation of it. That's how it was for me when I met my teacher in a ceremony, and I immediately felt that recognition that he would be somebody that I would learn with. But even at that time, I didn't think that I would actually be in the place of facilitating ceremonies. That came later. But that was my entry into the path.
Well, I want to go deeper with lineage. Okay. So
Mm.
I understand, but I want our listeners to understand, why is it important to work with someone who actually has a deep relationship with the plants that go into ayahuasca? I mean, I know the first time I ever took ayahuasca was in 1996, and I took it with my teacher, Ralph Metzner. And actually, I'll tell on myself a little. I had a friend who had also worked with Ralph, and I was on the phone with him. I was up at this, it was my first group ever, and it was being offered. And so I had called the friend to tell him, and I was like, oh, I think I'm going to, of course, we were talking in code on the phone, and I was like, I think I'm going to try the big H, like thinking it was ayahuasca.
Uh-huh, uh-huh.
because that's how I had heard. I know that's how I had heard it, more in my own ear. And he's like, I think it's the big A. so,
That's hilarious.
so I clearly did not read about it at Stanford. But then I had other teachers and did it with them as well. They then took me to Peru, where I worked in the jungle with a respected curandero. And then that was in 2000. And then only after that, I've only worked with people who have devoted their path to the medicine. I don't do ayahuasca anymore with anyone who doesn't have a deep devotional path and a lineage. I'll repeat my question because it was a while back. Why is it important to work with someone who actually has a deep relationship with the plants?
Yeah, I feel like it's so personal, right? Like how we all find like our meaning making through what medicines we decide to ally with, how we decide to work with them. And especially now where there's just like so much access, like to experiences and medicines that was just not the case even 10 years ago, even less than that. For me, I believe that ayahuasca is a very, very powerful medicine, and it's also a delicate medicine, and it requires a lot of care, a lot of, and this is the case for other medicines. And I think it's, so much of where I really try to come from with my work, especially at this present time where people are having so many different experiences, is that I think it's just so important that people really tune into what's right for you, what feels right for you, what resonates as truth. And that said, to work with ayahuasca in traditional lineages, it's always been through long-term apprenticeship. And whether it's in indigenous ceremonies, if it's in churches, like that really is the way that that knowledge is passed down. It's an experiential learning. It's a process of really learning with a teacher that you have the opportunity to just deepen that relationship with what it is to facilitate that for other people and to deepen your relationship with the plants themselves. I think that there's a lot to be said about what it is to cultivate that and to create safety in these types of spaces. So that's a brief commentary on that. But I think that yeah, I would never participate in a ceremony with someone who didn't have extensive lineage. I think there's also that aspect of like the mysterious quality of ayahuasca and of the space that you open up when you take that medicine, and you're opening yourself, and the field opens up to a lot of different energies that come through. So for me, I feel that it's through my relationship with my teacher and my lineage that I have protection, and that I have also a sense of connection and stability that personally I wouldn't feel comfortable doing that if I didn't have that. And I know there's many ways that people do things, but that's my personal take on it.
Well, I 100% agree with that. And that's why I want to talk about this in my safety guide that you guys are always hearing me promote. I say if the person you're thinking of working with, and that this is with any medicine, but especially ayahuasca, but if the person you're thinking of working with calls themselves a shaman and they don't have a decades long relationship with an indigenous teacher, then you should run. And so I'm curious what you think of the prevalence of people who are serving ayahuasca in their living rooms with no lineage, no training, no direct relationship with the plant, meaning they're not growing it or tending to a garden in South America. So what are your thoughts about
Mhm.
these guides, and what would you tell any listeners who are considering working with someone like that? And I'm not trying to be negative about all of this. I'm just
Yeah.
exactly what you just said this is I just think it's so important. I want to double down on this.
Yeah. I wouldn't recommend that either. I think that one of the shadow sides of ayahuasca, and I think of psychedelic experiences in general, is that sometimes part of these experiences is a feeling of great self-empowerment and a feeling of great power that you find this sense of yourself, and that is so beautiful. And the shadow side of that is ego inflation and this sense of, okay, I experienced this, and like now I'm going to offer it to others, and the medicine told me, and I, that whole dialogue that can happen. And I think that that's a real slippery slope. And like, if you don't have mentorship, if you don't have ongoing practice, that doesn't happen in just a 6 week training or a 6 month training or a year long training, frankly. Like, I think that you really develop the skills to do this type of work over extended training and extended mentorship and extended work on oneself, so that when you're in that space of facilitating, you really can go in clearly to be able to hold space for others who may be navigating very challenging experiences. And it's up to you to be that stability and to be that connection to clarity and to guidance and light. And that's just so important. So I agree with you. I think it is like minimum like a decade is a good reference, I think, for somebody working with ayahuasca, and having some type of mentorship, I think is just so important.
Hey, fellow explorers. Thoughtful planning and preparation is the foundation of any successful psychedelic journey. And if something does go wrong, knowing how to navigate that difficult space is essential. That's why I wrote my psychedelic safety guide, including what to do when things go wrong. It's filled with tips and tools for keeping you and your friends as safe as possible. You'll find it at our website, psychedelicdivas.com. Please, go get it, read it, and share it. The more we all know, the safer we can keep each other. So let's talk about your teacher and your lineage. Like, specifically, you said, all right, you found your teacher, not in
Mhm.
Peru. You found your teacher in Colombia. So tell us
Right.
about finding them, and then you've worked with them for the past 17 years. So what does that look? What does that difference look and feel like?
Yeah. So my teacher is Taitawan Agreda Chindoy from the Kamcha community of the Upper Putumayo of Colombia, from the Sibundoy Valley. And in that lineage, it's the medicine is actually referred to as yahe, not ayahuasca. And he comes from a family of healers. He was born into this path in a way. And what I feel like I have learned in my direct training with him is not only about the medicine and the ceremony, which is a huge part of the training and the learning, but I also feel like what I have learned and what has really influenced my practice is the importance of reciprocity, the importance of bringing our medicine experiences to our daily life, to using our experiences with the medicine to engage in our communities, not to disengage in our communities. Um, my teacher is actually currently the governor of his community right now for the fourth time. He does a lot of work with language revitalization, with environmental restoration, through the church that I'm the founder of here in the United States. We've supported a lot of work that's happened in that community, and it feels to me that ceremonial practice is both what we do in ceremony, but also how we bring that out into the world. So yeah, that's kind of like briefly about it. But in addition to that, like I've just have spent a lot of time there. I've been spending time in that region, yeah, for 17 years. In the beginning, I would go for months at a time, just really just being in that practice of accompaniment, of being in ceremony, of being a bridge, a translator for English speakers who were going to that community, and then really just like being on a path of learning. And like I said in the beginning, it actually wasn't my intention ever to serve medicine. I actually really saw myself as being a bridge to help people find the medicine, and then through various courses of events, the pathway opened up for me to receive that blessing. And that is what really led me to create Circle of Sacred Nature Church and to kind of just formalize that practice. Um, but that's how it happened for me. And that's how my training has been.
So I'm curious because I worked in Peru.
Mhm.
So I know that's the lineage, and then that same teacher came here into the U.S. I've only worked in another teacher's that's all been in the Peruvian tradition.
Mhm.
You've drunk in both countries,
Mhm.
in
Mhm.
both styles. How would you describe the difference in just I don't know, the cultural way that it's held, or the different style in the actual ceremonies? Um, do they do icaros in the Colombian ceremonies? I mean, just explain what icaros are, and then tell us the difference.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, there's so much to be said about those, but briefly, so Icaros is a terminology in the vegetalismo and different indigenous traditions of Peru, where it's really the practice of like working with the healing vibration of song or of chants and so forth. And it really is the idea that in the effect of the medicine, a field is opened up and the vibrational sound that is coming through the shaman or the facilitator is really a pathway towards healing and towards balancing energies, removing things that don't serve, and just that's the modality of that way, briefly. And in the Colombian tradition, there's also the use of song and chants. They aren't called icaros, they're just called the cantos, like the songs. So that's worked with as well in a different way. They don't sound like Peruvian icaros. They can sound, I mean, I think every icaro really depends on how it's coming through the healer and the person. So, but they do have like a different general sound to them than the Peruvian icaros. In the Colombian tradition that I work in, and it's very similar to many traditions in that region, is actually the use of the harmonica. The harmonica is played a lot in ceremony, and songs are also sung. Silence is used. Other instruments are also brought in at different points. And then something that's a bit distinct in the Colombian lineage, I think, is the specific limpia that happens or cleansing in the ceremony. So in that way, the cleansing that happens in Peruvian traditions tends to be through the icaro and through the use of sopla, which is like blowing of agua florida or other substances like on a person. That practice is also used in Colombian traditions. In my tradition, we work with a plant called chonduro, and it's the extract of the root of a plant that is then used for the sopla or for the blowing of plant essence on a person. And that's really thought to like work with balancing like mal aires or like bad air energies and wind energy. And then in the practice of the limpia, we also do different things like anointing with plant essences, working with something called the huayra, or in Peruvian traditions, it's called the shakapa, but it's like a kind of a leaf rattle, so to speak. Not really, but it's like that. So yeah, they're different, but they're similar in the sense that I think the emphasis on ritual, the emphasis on really honoring that everybody is having their own personal experience in the ceremony, but there's also a group experience that's also happening. So those are just some of the differences and similarities.
Well,
Oh,
you
one more
mentioned.
that I think
Oh,
is
go ahead.
actually distinct, actually, that I'll share is that I think it's interesting that in Peruvian ayahuasca traditions, there's a common understanding that ayahuasca is like a grandmother energy and it has a feminine quality to it, which I definitely experience as well. But in the Yahe traditions of Colombia, it's actually considered to be a grandfather energy, and it has more of that like masculine kind of understanding around it. I really experience both of them, but I think it is an interesting difference. And so often, especially in the United States, where we get exposed to like certain things, I think there's a common narrative that ayahuasca is referred to as grandmother and she, which is true, and I've experienced that, but also just honoring the diversity that there's just so many different ways of experiencing it and seeing it.
Well,
So
see, now I didn't know that because yes, coming from the Peruvian tradition, it has always been feminine and grandmother, and that is how
mhm.
I've experienced the plant as well myself. So
Yeah.
that's really interesting. Well, so you mentioned that when you started working with your teacher, you certainly you did not have the vision that you would be serving the medicine at some point. So you've actually gone way further beyond just serving the medicine. You've started your own church. So that's a big step for anybody. And it is legal in the US to ayahuasca within a church environment. Tell us about where it is and tell us about the values or principles that guide your church and also what made you go both feet in. That's a huge commitment to the medicine.
Mhm, mhm. Yeah, so it was a combination of things that led me to that decision, but mainly it was really just sitting with what does it look like to sustainably do this type of work in the United States? the safest way possible. And I will also acknowledge that it's a delicate regulatory framework. And even, even just openly talking about it on this podcast, this is like new territory for me as well to be more open about it. I'm not particularly concerned, but I do want to just like presence that like anybody working with these plant medicines, it's delicate. And so there's that. Now, that said, I really sit in the truth that when we are gathering in ceremony and doing the practice and the ritual that we do with ayahuasca, it is a sincere expression of our spiritual belief. And that is really what defines a church and a religious practice here in the United States. And I feel very confident that is what is happening in that space. It is a form of prayer, it is a form of spiritual practice, and there's deep sincerity behind it. Now, certainly in the indigenous settings where these medicines come from, it's really considered to be a traditional medicine and a medicine for the spirit. And like it transcends concepts of religion and so forth in those communities. And many of those communities, such as the one that I go to, they are Catholic or Christian, and they have this traditional medicine practice. But they're Catholic and Christian because of the impact of colonialism and all of that. But they sit in their truth, and now their practice is a blending of these different cosmologies, and it's so beautiful. And in some way, I feel like we are at this cross section now in our culture where we are creating these new cosmologies of how we are all just experiencing our spirituality and our practice. And in that way, I feel like our church is like sitting at that kind of forefront of really reclaiming that this is spirit to us. This is how we connect with spirit. And in a way too, in the spirit of this podcast, I do feel this like divine feminine like quality to that like what are these like patriarchal systems that exist that say that church and religion have to be one way when they don't. Like we can choose how we want to express our divinity and connect with what feels true to us. And so I feel like that is just like a central kind of tenet of our church and my church. And it's called Circle of Sacred Nature because it just acknowledges the sacredness of nature that is both our internal nature and the nature around us. To me, that's so much of what the medicine of ayahuasca carries is deep medicine for ourselves, but also so often this like piercing awareness of just the beauty of and the interconnection of our own wellness with nature and with the living energies of the earth. Those principles really weave through our church. And then, as well as the principles of the importance of reciprocity and supporting the Indigenous lineage that informs our practice. And so we do a lot of work in that way, and we have been. And then there's also this like evolutionary quality to it where we'll see how it continues to express. Like I feel like what's been really beautiful for me now, being on this path for a while, having my motherhood be very much shaped by my work with plant medicine and supporting many people who have become parents through their work with plant medicine, is also looking at how does this practice inform our life in our families and in our communities? And what does that sustainability look like as parents engaging in these types of practices as well? How do we talk about it with our kids? How do we just like be in a balanced way with it? Is something else that I'm very interested in, that inquiry and how that will continue to evolve over time.
Well, let's talk about being a mother and, and having kids and what you do say to them and, what you tell them to say or not say. In indigenous cultures, I mean, it's the children, the children are welcomed into ceremony at, I don't, I mean, I would say just a very young age. I don't know from the very beginning, but
Mhm.
I know that the mothers, can, also often drink while pregnant. And so it's woven into motherhood in the indigenous communities that serve ayahuasca, from my understanding. So, what have you seen in the indigenous world around motherhood, and then how do you, that's not where we live or how we live. So how do you model that and teach that here?
Yeah, it's definitely been my experience in Indigenous communities that I've in an ayahuasca Yahe Indigenous communities that children are welcomed into the space. And for me, that's one of the things that I love most about spending time in Indigenous communities, that like you really just see that normalization, that integration of the practice in that family setting. It's just what's happening. It's all fine. And then in terms of how I navigate that in my life, it's delicate because that's not part of our culture so much here. And it's getting to be more in a way. And like I welcome this like blossoming that I feel is like happening in a way where there's just more familiarity with all this. But for my own children, they understand it as a sacrament, as a traditional medicine, and it's just understood as something that is very special and that we hold in a very just sacred and special way. We're quite open with our kids about it, and we navigate that line of what's age appropriate, what feels right, and it's just like an organic process in a way as well. Yeah.
I'm sure it's got to be just an ongoing conversation and a fascinating one, right? Because as you said, age
Yeah.
appropriate, and then as they're growing and learning more and wanting to understand more, deepening into whatever it is that you're, wanting to share with them. But I mean, it's actually it's an interesting conversation for any mother who works with psychedelics. But I mean, this is so deeply involved. I mean, your life is wrapped around this, but it's even more wrapped into who you are and what you
Mhm.
do, and then and who you are as a mother and how you show up as a mother, I would imagine.
Mhm. Yeah, definitely. Definitely. I just feel like for the most part, my experience has been very positive of feeling how my relationship with ayahuasca and with this practice, like I feel like it helps me be a better mother. Actually, I feel like one of the beautiful things about ayahuasca, and I think just ritual, respectful use of working with plant medicines, is the relational aspect of it. Can be so much about ourselves, like definitely, but then right beyond that, we can get so much understanding of our close relationships and of the people close to us and patterns and different things. There's just like a whole world that can be accessible to us if we turn our attention to that when we're having these types of experiences.
Well, I know
Yeah.
you live in Northern California, which would certainly hold a certain perspective around this work. But you know, when you go to PTA meetings or the equivalent of that, how do you introduce yourself?
It's a great question, Carla. I'm also a soccer coach, and I'm on the school board. I don't lead with that because I don't feel like that. That's just not something that I generally lead in any introduction of myself. I mean, I do other things as well. It's not the only thing that my work is. As you shared, I teach on the subject. I'm an adjunct faculty at the Graduate Theological Union, where I teach at the intersection of spiritual care and psychedelics and entheogens. And then my work as the co-director of Posada Natura Retreat Center in Costa Rica is also a big part of my work. And so I tend to lead with those things. But if somebody knows me well enough, they know about this other part of my life. And I think that it's just been a whole journey for me personally, also, of just acknowledging that, I live here in the United States and this is who I am, this is what I do. And yeah, very much pray for protection and guidance. And I feel like overall at this point, I can sit in the truth that I feel like the way that I work in this way, I feel very confident about it. And I now have many years under me where I've been doing this work for some time in a community and in a setting where we have people in our community that have been practicing with us for many, many years. And I really feel like we embody the spirit and the principles of a church. And so I sit in that space of security. Yeah.
I mean, I've had that same journey of how to introduce who, myself and my focus and my work. And I
Right.
don't, I'm totally fine sharing about the podcast now, but I don't typically, I don't lead with it. It's not the first thing I say when I don't go to PTA meetings, but um, what's
But
funny.
I imagine it's similar. Like you having a podcast on this, and even when you
Yeah.
when you asked me to come, I was like, I don't okay. But I think that this is also like part of not to like feel so grandiose about it, but like I think this is part of like the cultural change that I would like to see and like what I would like to support that, this is not these medicines, these expanded states. Like, this is just like, we actually need as mothers, as women, as grandmothers, as whatever, to just like actually like find right relationship and be able to bring it into the light and to just like talk about these things. And I feel really passionate about that. I mean, I have of my three children, one of my oldest daughters, she's a teenager, she's 16, she's coming into the space of parties and alcohol and all the things. And like, it's just like, it's all, I just think we need to have actually just like a more mature dialogue, like as a society, as parents, as elders, of what it means to be with these experiences, with these states. What is it to find right relationship and balance? So I think part of that is bringing the dialogue forth. So that's
You know,
what called me forth to say yes to
I,
be here.
I completely agree. And I can say that neither one of us would have thought, maybe we would have hoped, but would not have imagined uh, 30 years ago when I first drank, 20 years ago,
Mhm.
whatever it was, when you first drank ayahuasca, that we would be having this conversation.
Right.
And so I really want to honor everybody who has held that torch alive, through those years. On everybody who kept the flame going and has been able to bring this so that it is so above ground at this point, still illegal and above ground, and that's a massive difference in
Mhm.
just a matter of decades. So that's hopeful. Well, all right. So you have the church here in the U.S., and then you also have Posada Natura, which is your retreat center in Costa Rica. So tell us about the retreats. Like, what do they look like, and are they open to anyone?
Yeah, thanks for asking. So, Posada Natura Retreat Center, it's a family retreat center. It's in our family, and we offer it's just really a venue where any facilitator can come and do their work there. We like to work with mission aligned facilitators, but any type of wellness program or contemplative practice program or anything like that is totally welcome there. And I have been in relationship with Posada Natura since about 2001. And I actually, when I was first learning about ayahuasca, I'd had my experience in Peru, and then I was in Costa Rica and I was working on a permaculture farm. And I actually brought a cutting of the vine from one permaculture farm to Posada Natura. And that vine was planted there. And so now we have very mature vine on the property going back many, many years. And just as of about 6 years ago, we also have mature chacruna plants as well. So we are able to make the medicine on the land. And it's a really just beautiful retreat center. And we also stored 1,100 acres of a rainforest reserve as well. So all of the activities of the retreat center support the conservation efforts that happen there. And I facilitate ayahuasca retreats a few times a year there. My next retreat is in July, and they are open. I have a screening process, and I really take a lot of care to make sure that it's the right fit for anybody to come to have that experience. But it is open to people, and I also have done different types of focus retreats at Posada Natura. So I've been part of an addiction program called Natura Care Programs, where we were running cohorts just focused on addiction. And then just this year, we started to have a cohort within the retreats focused on firefighters and first responders. And that was a really neat retreat that I was just leading last month that had that. So we had 5 firefighters and first responders, and then the general group as well. Yeah.
Oh, that sounds beautiful. Yeah, and
Mhm.
obviously so important. And I
Yeah.
love that you're growing and tending to your garden and making your own ayahuasca now, which is just, that itself is just such a beautiful journey. After he died, Terrence McKenna's ayahuasca that he had brewed was given out to friends and people, and I had the opportunity through both of my major teachers to drink his ayahuasca. And
Mhm.
there's so much to be said for, like, when you go when you're in South America, you are working with the person most likely, who actually brewed the tea,
Mhm.
and so to be able to have that relationship here, and in Costa Rica at your own retreat center, I really think it really does make a difference. It's the vibration, of you in the medicine would make it such an aligned experience.
It's very beautiful to have that experience, and it's different. Yeah. And I think it's also, as we were talking about in the beginning, like we say this like one word ayahuasca is this one thing, but it's so interesting how different the different brews are. Peruvian medicine, Colombian medicine, Hawaiian medicine, Costa Rican medicine. It's all very, very different. And I think it's such a unique medicine where you really appreciate just the vibrational quality of land, of soil, of energy. Yeah,
Of
it really lifts
intention.
up that
Yeah.
intention of prayer, of all of it. It's so powerful. Hmm.
Let's we can still keep with the relational theme here, but let's talk about the relational aspect of plant medicine as it connects to the feminine principle of honoring our cycles. So you've spoken about ayahuasca and women's health, specifically about menstruation, eating disorders, fertility, and other issues. So what should our listeners know about the role ayahuasca can play in women's health issues?
Yeah, I think that there is a lot to be said about just the emotional journey that anybody is on when navigating women's health conditions or challenges. And in my experience for myself and in working with others, I believe that ayahuasca can be a very, very powerful medicine just to be able to work on those layers underneath what the body is manifesting. And in some way, sometimes it can be a powerful gateway to actually receive the message of what my body is saying. What is my body saying through this, whatever it is that's manifesting, and what is here for me to learn? How can this be a teacher for me? I think in so many ways, ayahuasca is a teacher plant. Like it teaches us things, or it teaches us what we need for some. It might not be it, it might be something else. And I think in the case of navigating women's health cycles and challenges, it can be such a powerful teacher of like, oh, okay, like I need this. Like a powerful message that I've received in working with ayahuasca has actually been, it's really brought me very close to Ayurveda, to Ayurvedic principles of just how that, how the principles of Ayurveda in a lot of ways, I think can bring balance to somebody who's having a long-term relationship with ayahuasca and other psychedelics for that matter. I think Ayurveda has a lot of deep understanding of just what it is to find balance and to like cultivate that in a really deep way. And it's brought me a lot closer to my contemplative practices, to yoga, to meditation. But yeah, I think it can be such a powerful ally for women's health in so many ways.
Well, some indigenous traditions won't allow women to drink ayahuasca while they're menstruating.
Mhm.
So, do you have any thoughts on this tradition?
I do. That's it's interesting, all of that. I mean, I will say that even just taking a step back from that question, like even my teacher's openness to train women and to train a woman not from the community, that was a really big deal. Like that it's typically in that community, women don't lead ceremonies. It's typically a male oriented practice. And yet he had a very clear message that it was time for him to teach women, and it was time for him to teach women from outside his community. So that's what opened up the door for me. And I will say that just being in this space, like, I think that it's interesting that that same awareness, like, has been happening for many different indigenous communities in ayahuasca communities where there wasn't previously an opening to training women. Now more communities are actually like receiving a very direct message that it's time to train women to facilitate. And so I think that's just like a beautiful phenomena that is happening right now. And then in terms of menstruation, like, I think totally honor all the different perspectives on it. And there's certainly in more male dominated perspectives, indigenous perspectives, the understanding is that when a woman is menstruating, that they are sometimes carrying dense energy. Sometimes that energy can be disruptive to the ceremony or harmful for the person. That's kind of the perspective of it. That's not my perspective. I feel like it's a time, it's a cycle that a woman has, and it can be very helpful to be working with medicine during that time. I think it's very, very personal. And this is the part where, even when it comes to women's health and women's cycles, like, I think if one chooses to work with ayahuasca as a more long-term in a more long-term relationship, so to speak, like, it's a real opportunity to like really deeply tune into what balanced relationship looks like with it, because it's a strong medicine. And even if you're working with it with lower doses or in a more gentle way, which I'm a big advocate of as well. I don't think every ayahuasca journey needs to be like the super strong thing. Like, sometimes that's the right medicine, but sometimes that's not. And I really believe that that's just, yeah, that's how I work. But all that said, when it comes to like women's health challenges and things like that, like, it can just be so helpful to get insight on it, but it's so important to know what right relationship is. And then coming back to menstruation, yes, like, every woman is so different. Like, as I'm now getting older, I'm entering perimenopause. I'm 46. And so I'm like in this time where I can feel my body's changing, and I can feel that where things didn't affect me as strongly when I was younger, like, I feel it more now. I'm more sensitive to it. So, an example, like when I work with ayahuasca, when I'm on my cycle, I work with smaller doses of it because I don't feel like I need that strong medicine. I feel like my body is already in a cleansing process, and I can work with it very powerfully in a more subtle way. And I see that many women, like, I don't want to say evolve, but like can change into like finding ways to work with it more subtly, and to work, especially when they're working with their cycle, to work with it maybe in a more delicate way. And then I'll say that there are other women that they just don't have that experience. Like, it doesn't affect them at all. And then there's some women that have clear no's. Like, I absolutely am not going to be in ceremony when I'm on my cycle. So I just think it's like a real opportunity to tune in and to like really feel what's right for you.
Well, I know back when I was bleeding, I can't tell you how many times I would do, some sort of medicine ceremony or recreationally, and it would trigger my period.
Mhm.
I mean, I would be coming upon my period. It wouldn't just trigger it out of the blue, but it would bring it on. So there was always some sort of, if I was a day or two away from it, there was always a relationship to that. I'd be in ceremony and be like, oh, okay, gotta go, gotta run to the bathroom.
It's happening. Yep. So common. So common.
Well, I
Mhm.
just want to talk a little bit about eating disorders in ayahuasca, because ayahuasca, one of the known impacts of ayahuasca is that's very common to it is purging and or vomiting. And so someone who has an eating disorder, someone who's bulimic, for example, and already has that level of purging in their disorder. So
Mhm.
how would you talk about what would you say to someone who was considering doing ayahuasca around their eating disorder, but is afraid that would not be a good relationship?
Yeah, that's a great question. So I can speak really personally from this question, because it was actually navigating an eating disorder that brought me to ayahuasca in the first place. So I was at Stanford. I felt very accomplished in some ways, but in other ways, I was navigating this eating disorder that would kind of come and go. And for me, and what I've seen now supporting many other women who have navigating eating disorder journeys, is that the purge with ayahuasca is kind of just fundamentally different than the purge with an eating disorder. And I think this is where it, as so often with psychedelics, they give us the opportunity to look deeper into something. And, on one level you could say, but the person has a problem purging. But what is actually contributing to that cycle, to that thought process, the spiritual disconnection that is happening, what is actually happening for that person, it's a patterning, it is a deep embedded just cycle that is happening for that person. And in some way with ayahuasca, what can happen for a person is that they can see that cycle that's happening for them. They can sometimes experience the lifting or the realigning of their energy, so they don't feel locked in that same negative cycle. And in that way, the purge that happens with ayahuasca can often be like a purge of that behavior, or a purge of that mentality, or a purge of that just cycling that they're kind of locked in a way. And I don't think that it's a magic bullet. There are some people that find that, they're changed after one ceremony. Typically, that's not what happens. That wasn't my experience personally, and that's not what I typically see in the field. But it can be the beginning of something different, the beginning of feeling an awareness of something else aside from being in the prison of that behavior or of that thought pattern. And then it's up to the person to build that scaffolding around them, so they have the support and a new structure to step into over time, that then leaves that behavior where it needs to be, not with them. So I think it's really just it's a whole process. But I do think that, coming back to just the beauty of what we see through clinical research, through science, there's now clinical studies that are being looked at for psychedelics and eating disorders. There's actually a paper that was written about ayahuasca and eating disorders, which was interesting, but it's not getting as much attention. I hope it gets more. So we're seeing it being supported by research, but I think also from a more indigenous shamanic kind of energetic perspective, one can really appreciate and see that eating disorder, that behavior, it's an energetic imprint in a way. And when you can have a medicine that can help realign that, can help bring the person, gift the person awareness to see what is behind that, that can be an incredible gift that can begin a process of healing.
Well, you've co-founded addiction programs where you've done
Mhm.
retreats with ayahuasca. Would you say it's a similar pattern,
Yes.
similar like benefit patterning? Like it's not necessarily a one and done, but you're seeing the addiction pattern in a different way? Is it, I
Yes.
mean,
I think it's absolutely the same, actually. Like, I think that the fundamental mechanism of how ayahuasca can be helpful for addiction, for eating disorders, for OCD, for just these deep patterns. It's very much the same how it works in all these conditions. And in some way, it's like we have to give language to things, of course, but like what we call an eating disorder or addiction or anxiety or all these things, like from a more kind of spiritual, energetic perspective, it may actually be seen as that this person is disconnected from their spirit, or there's some equilibrium in their being that is then leading to this behavior, but it's not the behavior that is necessarily like what needs to be addressed. What needs to be addressed is actually under the behavior, and then from that place there can be lasting healing, lasting awareness of what has contributed to that behavior in the first place.
Oh, that's beautiful, and I think that's such an empowering place for people who are suffering with these different addictions and anxieties. I think it's a wonderful reason to overcome the fear and concern of like, oh, do I want to? I don't know if I want to do ayahuasca or not. But I mean,
Right.
I always refer to her as she, but
Mhm.
uh, it's, she is such a healer. And by the way, it's not always gentle. Nobody has kicked my butt harder in medicine ceremonies
Yeah.
than grandmother. I could, refer to her again, and it's always
Yeah.
been feminine for me. That has been. I mean, I have learned. That is where I learned to fully surrender, was in those experiences with her. But I've also received great, beautiful, deep healing, and so I would invite people who are maybe suffering from those issues, to consider, to find. You have to find your yes for this. You can't just be like, well, okay, these ladies on the podcast
Totally.
told me to do it. It's like, no, 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 we did not.
No, we didn't.
You have to find your yes, and then you have to find
Do.
your teacher. You have to find
Mhm.
everything that has to be aligned for your path with this. But if you do find that, I think that's can be a powerful healing experience for these situations. So,
Yeah. I mean,
um,
and I think the other thing too, I'll just mention along the
yeah.
lines of eating disorders and addiction, in ayahuasca, to me, one of the most beautiful gifts of it is the way that it can ignite our kind of, for lack of a better word, like our innate intelligence to then like naturally gravitate toward what is balanced for us, if all of the if we support all the conditions to support that. It's not a magic bullet by any means, but just to have like what I've seen for myself personally, what I've seen for people working with navigating addictions and eating disorders, is just to have that, like, the spaciousness and the levity to feel yourself out of that just cycle and that like punishing like imprisonment that those things can feel like, and just to have that momentary lift where it's like, oh, like I am not that, and there's something in me that can see that and can recognize that I can do things differently. That's just so beautiful. And then it's up to us how, again, like how we support that, and it's not just one time. And I think in some ways, like when we have these things that are karma or dharma or whatever, it's like we're in relationship with them, and like we have to continue to find relationship with it. And these medicines or these experiences can be really powerful allies. And it's also up to us to be in allyship with them and not rely on them and not feel like, okay, I just need to do that ceremony to do this thing. It's like, well, maybe you need to do the thing and you can do the ceremony. But like, it's like, I think that's also a big part of maturing as a field and as all finding mature relationships with these experiences.
Well, just in alignment with that, so you've said before that the ceremonies are the easy part. Our daily lives are what bring the teachings of the plants to life. So I mean that is an integration sentence if I've ever heard one. So how do you embody that in your daily life?
For me, I feel like my children are just instant feedback for where I'm at any point in time. But I feel like I embody it by being in my life and by just sitting in the importance of taking care of myself, my relationships, being engaged with my community, and just being in a balanced way. For me, like a balance is just like such the indication of if I'm walking in a good way, is if I'm feeling balanced, if I'm living and embodying my life in the way that I want to be, where I feel balanced. Yeah.
Beautiful. Okay,
Mhm.
final question. If ayahuasca could speak directly to the collective right now, especially to women who are navigating and awakening, healing, and leadership, what do you feel she would say?
I feel like she would say, um, to have trust, and patience and faith. And to me, that's so much the spirit of the ayahuasca medicine. And what's also been directly taught to me by my teacher is faith and patience. And I think trust is part of that too. That we, in some way, we know our truth. We know we've been given experiences that have given us some awakening on some level, and what it is to just like trust that arc, that unfolding, and just keep moving forward and keep having that faith that we're in a process and we're in an arc, and that's not doesn't always feel good or pretty or great, but that's part of it, is actually like being at these different edges. But I think as women especially, where in all the different ways, just like by our biology, sometimes we just hold so much and we carry so much. And so what is it just to give ourselves the grace that we so often give to other people, but sometimes we really need to turn that on ourselves as well. I think that's what she would say.
And I appreciate that call to grace for ourselves, that you're right, that we so often give to others and not to ourselves. So I think that's
Mhm.
the perfect place to land and wrap this. Um,
Thank you.
I want to thank everyone for listening today, and Celina, thank you for your wisdom, for your path, for your devotion to walking in right relationship with this powerful teacher. I just, I truly appreciate the deep wisdom you shared about learning how to listen to our bodies, to our cycles, and to the many ways life is guiding us. So, thank you for reminding us to trust our inner knowing and to remember that integration is just as sacred as the journey itself.
Thank you. Thank you so much for having me, Carla. It's great to be here with you.
So, as always, if you found this episode valuable, please share it with your friends and community. Come be a part of the conversation on Instagram at Psychedelic Divas. But more importantly, please consider joining our email list on the website. Instagram just recently took down our page saying we had violated their guidelines. And while we are back up, that can happen at any time. So, really, the best way to stay connected is through the dreaded email list. And I only send 2 emails a month, so it's pretty minimal. But I really would appreciate it if you would go to psychedelicdivas.com and share your email. You, of course, will get the safety guide that I am always chatting about and promoting. So there is reciprocity for your email. And I so appreciate all the love that you all are sending to the podcast. And if you could keep those 5 stars and thumbs up coming, I would be so appreciative. Thank you again, Celina. Total pleasure having you here. Really, really honoring your work and your devotion to plant medicine. So thank you.
Thank you.
And we will see you all next time. Thanks again. All right. Bye bye.